The bell. Only the bell is allowed to interrupt the pretenders. Great to see you here for what is our final session here at the Politico Pub. And with me, very recognisable, one of the most recognisable people here at the Conservative Party conference is Penny Mordaunt.
Hello! Or should I say cheers?
Oh, cheers. I thought, well, it's the last one. What could possibly go wrong over beer? I was about to list your formers, Penny, but they're very impressive, aren't they? You know, former leader of the House, former Secretary of State for Defence, a very prominent role, which I know is still very central to your interests, former Secretary of State for International Development and Women and Equalities, but no longer to be former because you are making a comeback. You would like to be back on the pitch. How's it going?
Yes, well, I'm styling myself as National Treasure and MP on sabbatical, I think is... I would love to come back. It is all about luck and timing, and I have to get back on the candidates list, and then I have to get selected for a seat. But I would love to return to Parliament, and I shall just try and do some good in the meantime.
We'll come to what you're doing in the meantime as well, but what brings you to the idea now? Are we just missing the rough and tumble? Is there something you thought, there's a certain amount of time I need out, I'm doing other things? Why now?
Well, you imply, Anne, that it was my choice to sit this shift out. It wasn't. I tried very hard not to sit this shift out. But look, there are stresses and strains that come with the job, but it is a remarkable job. It's a wonderful job, and it's a privilege to do it. And you don't have to have letters after your name to do good and to bring people together and have convening power. But you can do particular things from the green benches, and I'm not done yet. There are things that I want to get done, and so I shall try and get back and keep morale up along the way.
You had one of not the narrowest, but fairly narrow loss, didn't you, in Portsmouth North, about 700 men. About 780 is probably etched on your...
Yes.
You. I mean, what sort of seat might you be looking for? Would you have any idea of sort of how you see the comeback? Because it's not always easy, is it? I mean, there are lots of examples of very prominent people like Michael Portillo, who sat it out and came back. It was probably a bit harder in some ways than we might think. It's like, of course, they can come back. They're big names. How does that feel?
Well, it's, I feel for my colleagues who are in at the moment, because they have a very, very tough shift. I think there's not a lot of them. They have to cover off an awful lot of work. So I wish our team on the green benches were bigger. And getting selected as a candidate, it's a lengthy process. You might have to apply to a lot of seats. I certainly had to apply to a lot of seats before I got Portsmouth. I think for a year preceding my selection, I was living in London at the time, I went to every single council meeting just to understand what was going on locally. So it's a big deal, and you have to work hard to do it, but I'm up for doing that.
It's a very sort of basic question, but from what kind of position, given the situation of the Conservative Party now, given reform as it's big, it's sort of competitor, and frankly is sucked a lot of confidence or people away from the Conservative Party as we meet here. From what position are you saying, I'm coming back? What are you coming back to do? Or if you're able to come back?
Look, I think I've been quoted as saying, it's not much fun being Conservative at the moment, apart from this week, which has been great fun, and I'm sitting here in a pub with lovely people. But I don't think there's anything more important than you can do. It is very clear. We've just got to recognise how politics is changing. The driving force at the moment is that the country, which is generally not very political, I think only 2% of people have ever been a member of a political party, people are just fed up with things not working. They're worried about big issues facing the country and terrible things that are happening around the world. It's getting less reliable. It's getting a more dangerous world. And they see their political leaders not being able to affect things. And that's frightening to them. So we've got to address that. We've got to, which is why Kemi's working hard to get a nitty-gritty plan that is going to work. But that's what we need to do. And I come from a particular background and particular communities that I think were really disproportionately fearful at the last general election. And when you're frightened about not getting healthcare or the cost of living and all of those things, or borders not being controlled, that fear stills the future, and that's why the Conservatives lost.
And the polls are suggesting Nigel Farage's party is offering a message that resonates, national pride. The flag is very strongly at the heart of that. We're going to come on to rituals and traditions, which is something you've been looking at in detail for a book, which we'll talk about in a moment. But how does the Conservative Party then get back into that conversation without it just looking like, oh, well, someone's got a flag over here. I've never seen so many flags around, I'm not saying in any sort of denigratory sense, but like we've got all the parties now competing for symbols of national pride. Can look a bit like, oh, here we come as well. How do you see that contest, and how would you go about it?
Again, I think you need to understand why people are doing this. It's said of people in my former constituency, Portsmouth, that they had no need of flags. This was said in the sort of 18th century. They had no need of flags because they lived their patriotism in their lives. But going Portsmouth now, there's flags everywhere. And I think most people, for them, the flag is a symbol of love. It's a symbol of pride. And pride gets to the heart of that phenomenon I was talking about earlier, because pride is to nations what self-confidence is to individuals, as Richard Rorty said. It's a necessary condition for improvement. And I think the public want to be proud of their country. They want it to be capable. They want it to be listened to on the world stage. They want its public services to be second to none. That's what they want. They're very proud every day of things that are going on, but there's a lot that they don't feel proud of. And that's what I think is behind what's going on. So we have to give them confidence that they can feel proud of their country again. And that's in our actions every day. It's how we conduct ourselves this week, the things we're talking about. But it's also about what we want to achieve in the future. And that's the way to get into that.
Is there any sort of connection or rope bridge between the Conservative Party? I mean, we were really trying, particularly in the conversation with you as we conclude, as we did Labour, to sort of take a big view here. And, when we look back over this period down the line, well, we think, there should be a rope bridge between the Conservative Party and Reform. In the end, they may be apart on many issues, but it's a kind of a block on the right of politics. And if that is cut off, then you could end up on a losing streak.
Well, we're all just people. I mean, there are people in Reform that I know and talk to. There are people who are in Reform who have supported me in the past. I mean, Howard Cox, who did so much on the Fair Fuel campaign, I've known him for yonks. There are connections between.
You know Nigel Farage well?
No, I don't know him well. I've met him a few times in TV studios.
What's your view of him?
Well, look, I think that he's wrong on a lot of things, and I think that if you want to get back to service and duty, which is what this country wants from its politicians, the public want an end to transactional politics, and they want transformational politics. That's what they want. You have to be made of quite frankly, tougher stuff. You've got to be clear about what you're saying about particular world leaders, for example, when they're invading your allies. You can't tolerate fielding candidates in Scotland that are pro-independence and drape yourself in the Union flag down south. So I know there's a line in the media, why vote Conservative when you can have the real deal? Well, I think in a few months' time, people will be saying that on the flip side.
Interesting. And it was a framing that was in Robert Jenrick's speech that struck me today when he talked about to take our country back. He was also talking about traditions and customs, about which a book is available. I keep saying we're going to come to it, so we're going to have to hold it up in a moment. Let's fly the flag. Penny's written a book. Does anyone know? But just to be serious for one moment on that. Now, while I've been sort of exploring with some of the very senior Conservative politicians up here on this stage, and say, what's the tone that you want here? I mean, do you identify with Robert Jenrick saying he wants to take the country back? What's it back from at this point in politics?
So I wrote this book, and it is all about. It's called Pomp and Circumstance. Why
that is
British
the best
traditions?
Pivot from Robert Jenrick.
No, I'm coming. I'm not ducking it, but I just need to because actually I have thought about it a bit, Anne, and I have written a book about which is the answer to your question. People have a nostalgia. I mean, nostalgia is big business in this country. You know, we've got Goodwood Revive. I mean, look at the pub. Look at the pub. You know, this is, you know, there's sort of horse brasses everywhere. You know, there's it's old. Look at the names of beers in pubs. It's all old stuff. I did in my previous book. I did a lot of research on this, and I noticed that despite all the follies and castles we have in Britain, you can buy for your garden. It's called the Gothic Abbey Garden Ruin Kit. It's sort of the Jacob Rees-Mogg of garden ornaments. It's very, very young, but channeling antiquity. We love old things in this country, but that doesn't mean we're old-fashioned. It doesn't mean we're, you know, not cutting edge or modern. But it does tell us something about ourselves. And I wrote this book because of my experiences of our traditions as the late Queen's last Lord President and the King's first. And when we lost the Queen, it was at a moment of immense political turmoil. It was the start of the Truss administration. It was a bonkers time. And it was, to say the very least, and we lost Her Majesty. And we'd identified that moment as a moment of real peril for the country, because it wasn't a foregone conclusion they'd accept the new king. And I saw, through the Accession Council and then what followed, how the ceremonies, people holding big swords and all sorts of things, held us together. The proclamations involved everyone around the country. It brought us together, and it gave us the stability and reliability. And so the kind of fear and angst you're talking about, Anne, which is leading people to wrap flags around lampposts, because of the way the world is at the moment, and because people are, you know, they can't see the leadership from their government that they want during these times, the thing that should give us confidence is we may well be the best placed nation on earth to weather the storms that are coming up. And that's what the book is about, as well as talking about all the madcap cheese rolling, nettle eating, shin kicking, snail racing that goes on around the country.
So this is Pomp and Circumstance. You've written it with Chris Lewis. Why Britain's traditions matter. And that's quite interesting. You didn't just say, well, like, you could have done something quite whimsical. You're obviously very well known now as an international audience for being the world's finest sword carrier. What do you do with that? You know, so as you say, there's a seriousness here. There's an attempt, and as you say, but it goes everywhere from carrying a sword at one of the most solemn and most watched events in national life, as you say, to cheese rolling and other rituals. And I'm interested in what you think. I mean, some of the rituals that, by definition, you then have to get into are also a bit backward-looking. As you say, we're very fond of tradition. But yeah, when John Major talked about, what was it, old maids cycling through the mist, I mean, it was a sort of slightly odd sense of that he was channeling a past that didn't really exist anymore. And do you see any danger there that, although you're very well known for doing something people love to watch, that if you go too far down that route, you can end up in a kind of fustian Britain that doesn't exist anymore? Yes,
I think you have to see them for what they are. I mean, the traditions are, I mean, they're insane, some of them. I mean, they're hilarious.
Oh,
they're oh my gosh. I mean, you know, the Corgi Derby and the Pantomime Horse Derby, which takes place in Brighton, which the last furlong is done on an orange space hopper. I mean, there were crazy...
Is Angela Rayner in that?
She's got more time. She may well wish to do that. These are crazy things. But actually, there's a serious nature and a serious reason behind them. They're generally raising money for charity. They're bringing traders together. They bring together intergenerations. They reinforce our values. They honour monarchy, you know, pearly kings and queens, maid queens, goose queens. They pillory politicians. There are politicians being weighed, custard pied, dunked in rivers all over the country. You know, it tells us something about ourselves. And central to them are pubs and churches and town halls. So these things are important. They're important to those communities. When we researched this, we found that these traditions are on the rise. People are bringing them back. I mean, some of them have been going since the 9th century. Others are only a few years old. I mean, very urban areas that now have community orchards are having wassailing services in them for the first time. People are wanting to do this, and I think that's a response to how they're feeling about the world.
So let's say, I mean, you're influential anyway, the Conservative Party, and if you end up, as you say, you don't quite know which seat could shake loose, and you get yourself into the fight there, would you be saying to your Conservative colleagues, actually, you need to do more with this, more creatively, because there was a bit of a spat today. The national anthem isn't going to be sung at the end of conference this year. I think Kemi Baynor said, she just wants something. She wants something upbeat. She wants a pop song at the end. Now, on the face of it, that's a fairly, it's just a choice and should shape their appearances. But would you say, like, actually, maybe better to stick with what some people would consider a tradition? That's what sends them out at the end of conference. What would you have decided?
So I've never been involved in stage managing conference. It's way above my pay grade. But I will give you an example of something similar, because I campaigned for the UK theme, which was deemed by the Beeb to be very old-fashioned. This was, for those of you that were, some of you look too young to remember what the UK theme was, but it was actually written by two Jewish refugees that came here during the war, and it was a mashup of a whole raft of sort of British tunes, everything from kind of Rule Britannia right through to What Should We Do with a Drunken Sailor and everything in between, all regional around the UK. And Mark Damazar from the BBC misread the listening figures and scrapped it. But actually he'd misread it, and it was, rather than a few thousand people, it was hundreds of thousands of people loved it and listened to it. And I discovered when I was campaigning for them to maybe not bring the exact one back, but to reinvent it and update it, that our fishery protection vessels used to use this and blast it out over the water to warn the French fleet to stay away. It was just absolutely part of our kind of everyday lives for so many people, but it was viewed as fuddy and old-fashioned. And I think sometimes there's a wonderful David Lean film, 1944 it was made, called This Happy Breed. And the central character in there, Frank Gibbons, says, what works in other countries won't work in this one. We've got our own way of doing things. It may be a bit slow, it may be a bit dull, it suits us all right, and it always will. And in Britain, if you want transformational politics, the lesson from this is that it has to be rooted in the familiar, the traditional. That's what Thatcher did. It was rooted in things that people knew and weren't frightened about. And as a consequence, she was able to take the country forward at rapid pace and transform it.
So where is the tension there with the, let me put it, sorry, in this slightly less punitive way, is there a tension there between diversity of our cultures, our cities? We're in a great diversity here in Manchester. We had headlines this morning from Robert Jenrick, when there was a recording of him, as you know, emerged for a while ago, saying that he didn't see another white face when he was on a visit to Handsworth in Birmingham. It was about half a year ago. It was not the kind of country he wanted to live in. Now, I've just had Mel Strider on the stage before you, who distanced himself pretty clearly from those comments. He said, I would not have chosen those words. Who are you with?
Well, look, I think you can't just generalise about this. I know from writing this book and looking at different communities across the UK and how they've adapted traditions or actually brought them together. So some traditions that have been going on for yonks in certain parts of the country, Diwali will be to be brought in, and they celebrate both together. So there's a huge amount of incredible work that has gone on between different communities, between different faith communities across the UK.
But I think what he was saying quite specifically was that he was uncomfortable with a particular concentration of a population in one place.
And I was going on absolutely to say, what I think we have to address is that where you have women, for example, who are very isolated at home because they're not expected to particularly older women, to learn English, where you have situations where you've got things which grate against our values, we have to confront those things and we have to address them. So I think he has been quite vocal, understandably, about those particular things. I never like to comment on people where you just hear one or two lines and you haven't heard what they've said for the 20 minutes before. But I think that we are actually, as a nation, we've got good common sense about this. We know what's not acceptable. We want our politicians to address it, which is why, under the last Conservative administrations, people like Sajid Javid put a huge amount of effort in when he was at local government on ensuring that women, like I've just described, have access to English language lessons, for example.
You don't see any danger that the term just becomes a sort of race with reform to say pretty hard things about diversity, about, you know, basically Keir Starmer brought it up himself about race in the UK.
So no, because I don't think that the debate as it's being characterised is actually reflective of our nation. You clearly have people, you know, where for whom Tommy Robinson is you know, the poster boy. We've always had that in this country. I have, you know, started my political career in Portsmouth fighting the BNP. They were trying to, you know, move in and get established in my city. And my city, which is working class, brilliant area, told them to sod off. You know, that's, I think we are an incredibly tolerant, open society. And there's just so much good work that goes on between different communities. And we just have to hold on to that in all of this. We have to understand what's happening. And it's happening because people are dissatisfied and feeling rotten about our country not knocking it out the park. And as politicians, that's what we need to address. And we need to give people a bit more confidence about our ability to tackle these issues. And where we've got, you know, particularly legacy issues where this has gone badly wrong, grooming gangs being one key example, we've got to learn from those experiences.
It's a great point, which to finally, our final round of questions from the floor. So don't hold back, because there won't be another chance to come and ask questions till hopefully next year. Right, who's going to have a question for Penny? Because then I could actually have a beer and just listen. So take gentlemen at the front, and if there's anyone, and there's somebody at the back, you've got the mic, so let's go with you and then to the back.
Can you hear me? Hi, Penny.
Hi.
Do you support the policy of leaving the ECHR, or do you think that we're just catching up with reform?
No, I do support that policy. And I think Kemi's been right to do the hard yards behind it. And she hasn't just done the hard yards by reading a policy exchange report and getting the legal eagles on the case. She's actually thought how we would do it as well as what the right answer is. And she recognised, I was very struck with the press release she put out, the emphasis on working with Northern Ireland politicians, that the bit we have to tackle is the bit of the Good Friday Agreement, in the multi-party bit of that, as opposed to the international treaty. How we will work with those people in the coming months and years to really get a position that is going to work when we get in. So she's right to do that. I was a Brexiteer as part of the Fresh Start group, thought long and hard about how you reform it. But if you can't reform it, then you've got to do something else if you want to improve your situation.
Question at the back.
Hi, Penny.
Hello.
I come from a younger generation that is very unlikely to vote Conservatives based on our legacy, is seeming to be unlikely to vote Conservatives based on policy. So is it time that we start to focus on Conservative values as our main selling point to the younger generation?
Well, look, I think you're right that values are incredibly important. We've obviously got, and in fact, we've been criticised at this conference for giving a nod to the great lady, Mrs. T, because it's you know, she would have been 100 this year. But I think we can still learn a lot from her. And when she was asked to describe what Thatcherism was, what her policies were, those transformational policies, she listed a few things, you know, strong defence, sound money, ownership, all the stuff you know and love. But she said something equally important after that. She said, you know, people will point to those things and call them Thatcherism, but actually all they are is common sense. You know, at her heart, she was incredibly pragmatic. It wasn't that she stamped her values and authority on the nation. She listened to the nation and had been shaped by it. And she said that what she did was just release the potential of the British public. And she said that's all Thatcherism is. And I think for us, we need to show the public, young and old, that we are here for them. We have to get back to service and the notion of duty that we have to them. And that means listening to what they need and understanding what our country needs now. Halving the cost of energy would be a good plan. I'm glad to see Claire addressing that earlier this week. We need to get back to that and the pragmatism that made our party great. And I think we just need to bear that in mind. There's lots of conversations about ideology and philosophy and all that malarkey. Much more basic than that. Much more basic than that.
We're very down to
what
earth.
works.
I'm going to do a bit of insider trading, and my colleague Annabelle Dixon has a question.
Hello, Annabelle Dixon. I'm a colleague of Anne's. At a previous conference, you described the comms operation in rather fruity terms. I think that was in 2022. What have you made of the operation this year? And do you think that this conference will have they done enough to cut through to the outside world and kind of move the dial?
Well, I think the only downside about conference is you are in a slight bubble.
Really?
And yes.
I thought this was normal.
No, you are in a slight bubble. So I think when I go back to Portsmouth and I'm in possibly another pub in the near future, I think it's only then you really understand what cut through means. But I think the policy announcements we've had have been really good. I think they have been signalling to people that we understand what is actually required. The big numbers on curbing government expenditure, for example, I think those have been the right messages. What is also clear is that we have to transform how we communicate. I mean, at the next conference, how this country will have moved on in terms of what AI is enabling in terms of communications, for example, it's going to be unrecognisable to what we're doing today. So we've got to keep pace with that, and that's why Kemi's and her team's job is difficult, because they've got to rebuild the Starship Enterprise whilst we're facing the Klingons, if that's not a metaphor stretched too far, but that's what we've got to do. But that's what they are doing.
If we are blessed to meet back here at Politico Pub next year, are you confident Kemi Badenoch will still be leader?
Yes, I am, because I don't think my party is mad. We gave, I'm just giving you the pitch as to how people were feeling at the last election with all the turmoil and uncertainty. We gave the country 6 prime ministers in as many years, the last one being a Labour prime minister. If we go back to the nation and say, do you know what, folks, we're just going to have another leadership contest, I mean, that will be the end of us. I really do think that. It's just insane. Politics is a team sport. I think Kemi's doing a good job. I think she's got the most incredibly difficult shift, but she is hard as nails and she will get through it. And we just have to support her doing that. And we have to think, how can I help? And I just think, I mean, having spoken to sort of members all week, met a lot of them, that's how they're feeling. They just want to get on and contribute.
Just slightly inconvenient truth, as we run, on the podcast on Salmon, and we had the YouGov polling. It showed like the members, around half of them, really are not at all convinced that she should fight the next election.
No, I think the people that come to conference are the people who are out on Saturday mornings. They're people who are, doing stuff in their communities. They're working hard. They're talking to their electorates, and I think they're right. And I'm hoping that at the end of this week, when they go back, and members here are talking to their fellow members in their associations, that they will see the progress that we have made over the last 12 months, where the party has moved to on policy, and they'll say, yeah, all right then, we're with you. And that's what I hope, because that is the only way. We have a really serious job. We have to come up with that alternative plan, and we have to win back the trust and confidence of the British public. And more infighting and navel gazing isn't going to do that. We've got to get back to service. That's what the public want.
We should let you have a mingle and pour a pint. I'm afraid that is like you did notice that's written in blood in the agreement.
I have
you good at pouring
experience. I
pints?
am. I could manage to do you a Guinness if you've got that on tap.
All
But
right.
if not, I will.
Well, let's say goodbye to you first. I should say, very keen.
I
to
was
get to the-
legging it.
Thank you, Penny
you guys.
Mordaunt.
Thank you.
Read Pomp and Circumstance.
Pomp and Circumstance.
Available from like pretty much everywhere.
And all proceeds are going to some amazing veterans organisations. So please support. It's a hoot.